Are these on? Can you hear me? Okay. So the format will take a brief introduction from each of the panel members, between 5 and 7 minutes, just to give you an oversight of their work and all the fantastic things they're doing within the community. The theme of the panel is the challenges faced by the frontline service providers in the current political climate. Now, I don't want to say too much about that, obviously. That's for them to give you an insight. But we'll start with We'll start with an introduction from each panelist. Helena, are you okay to go first, or would you prefer? Of course, yeah. Would you be okay to go first, Pragna?
I'm happy to go first, yeah.
Please give a warm welcome to Pragna Patel.
Hello, everyone. It's great to be here. So I'm the director of Southall Black Sisters, which is one of the UK's leading advocacy and campaigning organisations for black and minority women. It's our 40th anniversary this year. So I guess I could, apart from giving my age away a bit, I'm also probably well placed to talk about some of the challenges that we face and the changes that we've seen. Of course, our work has consistently addressed the needs of black and minority women in the face of their experiences of domestic and sexual violence, abuse, as well as cultural forms of harm and multiple or intersectional discrimination involving, as you all know, the simultaneous sort of experiences of race, gender, and other forms of inequalities. The bulk of our work is, of course, to assist women through advocacy, counselling, befriending, and campaigning around the multiple issues that affect them, and to, more than anything else, help them to obtain protection and to assert their fundamental rights, human rights. So, along with other campaigning groups, I would say that we've, seen many changes. I guess the emphasis is that feminist campaigning has achieved many changes in the UK in the last 4 decades or so. And we've seen some very positive laws, policies, practices, action plans, strategies around violence against women. And that has also done something else, which is that it's increased awareness about all forms of violence against women and girls. And it has also improved institutional responses as well as measures of accountability. So these changes have made a real difference on the front line in terms of trying to support women to attain a level of security and dignity in their lives. But I would say that in the last decade or so, we're perhaps preoccupied with one issue more than any other, and that is how to obtain justice on behalf of women. And the reason why that has become our number one priority is because, more than anything else, we are now living in a very volatile climate. There have been wave after wave of very regressive economic and political measures that have been imposed, which has not only threatened the gains that feminism has achieved, but I actually think constitutes a worldwide assault on the very notion of citizen and human rights. So it's in that context that I think we need to talk about the challenges that we face on the front line in trying to support women to obtain justice. I don't know if I should go more into it now, or perhaps we can come back to it. Shall I flag up a few things that I think are some of the key challenges?
So we're going to open it up for a Q&A after the introductions. And obviously there's a lot more to sort of work with. But if you can all hold on to your questions for a few more minutes, and then we'll come back to it. But Is that okay with you?
I'll carry on and say a few more about the challenges. So I think I want to just flag up a few challenges. They're interrelated. But I think the most important challenge for us at the moment, perhaps the most significant, is access to legal aid. Because without it, you can't assert rights to protection, to liberty, to freedom of choice. You just can't do any of those things. So the cutbacks in legal aid have affected us severely. The vast majority of women that we support are women who have little or no resources. They're women who, by reason of lack of resources, lack of being able to speak English language well, lack of education, the circumstances they find themselves in, or the specific vulnerabilities they have, as a result of all those things, they have no meaningful prospect of accessing the legal system. And if they can't access the legal system, they can't access their rights. It's as simple as that. And the situation, I think, has reached crisis point. We are unable to support many women, particularly in the family justice system that's seen such huge cuts. And yet the family justice system is the site where we're meant to be protecting women and children, particularly. What we're seeing is more and more women having to act as litigants in person. They're finding themselves having to face their abusers, cross-examine their abusers. The presumption of equal parental contact is proving to be really difficult for many women because contact becomes another site of abuse for many women. So these are massive issues, and yet the family justice system simply is not seen. It's where there's been least development in terms of understanding and recognition of harms to women and children. I genuinely believe that they don't understand domestic and sexual abuse and its impact. Judges don't, CAFCAS officers don't, so there's some real questions there. Austerity generally, and of course public spending cuts, the severe public spending cuts, has led to the dismantling, the steady dismantling of the welfare state. That's the safety net that we all need if we're really talking about protection and justice. In the 80s, things were bleak. There was an economic climate that was particularly challenging then. But there was hope, and I think the hope was that as long as there's a welfare state, it is possible to try and support women in the face of the kind of horrors that they have to experience on a daily basis. The problem at the moment is we have a bleak economic climate again, but we can no longer be sure that we've got a welfare state to underpin anything. And that's the challenge, I think, that's really difficult. And the result of the kind of demise of the welfare state is that it's really hard to help women access social housing, emergency housing, welfare benefits, even the healthcare, particularly mental health services. It's again, crisis, epic crisis proportions. So what we have is we see that women are getting poorer, and that's also due to the long-standing structural inequalities and obstacles that they face in employment and in their household. The third area is the demise of specialist services, specialist domestic violence and sexual violence services. Feminism brought these about. Feminism showed that when you have specialist services, you can have better outcomes for women and children. And yet we're seeing the demise of these services and refuges. What we're seeing is changes in commissioning cultures that favor larger, more corporatized bodies that provide generic services. And we're seeing specialist services close or become vulnerable to closure. This is particularly true of Black and minority specialist services. So that means that there are very, very few alternatives. And one of the things that never ceases to amaze me is how the government's policies, laws and policies around violence against women and protecting women and improving rights isn't then matched by resources to turn that rhetoric into reality. And that's this huge, huge gap there. The fourth challenge that we face, particularly as black and minority women, is the hostile immigration environment. Punitive, harsh, inhuman immigration controls and measures are making it more and more difficult for abused women and children from minority backgrounds who have insecure status to access what little resources there are, because often they are subject to no recourse to public funds. That means that they're dependent on strangers, acquaintances, family members who are abusive, and others for charity handouts, with the result that they face further risks of other forms of harm, particularly sexual violence, sexual exploitation, and abuse. And we've long argued that the discriminatory processes within immigration law produces a double whammy for migrant women. Not only are they excluded from state protection, but they're actually subject to state complicity in the violence that they experience at the hands of their abusers. So I just want to end by saying that what happens when there is that kind of a justice gap, when there's that vacuum, when that vacuum is getting bigger, what happens is that it brings with it a set of other problems, particularly for black minority women. They're forced to turn more and more to discriminatory and unaccountable community and religious forums and tribunals to address their needs and resolve their problems. But this comes at a really heavy price. What they're subjecting themselves to are highly conservative, patriarchal, and unaccountable systems of arbitration and dispute resolution that has profoundly negative consequences for their right to equality and their right to freedom of choice. It is a really alarming development how much conservative and fundamentalist religious bodies have now started to take over welfare and even legal functions, quasi-legal functions, with the result that they're reinforcing the very abuse that women are trying to seek to flee. So we're increasingly having to confront that kind of, that particular challenge on top of all the other challenges that we face. And that is a really tall mountain to climb.
Thank you very much, Pragna. It's incredibly insightful. Caro, are you okay to...
So, I think I would echo all of what you said from our experiences and our women's experiences. So we are, for those that don't know, we are a women-only service based up in King's Cross, but working across London, supporting women involved in prostitution to exit at whatever pace they want, at whatever level they want, and when they're ready. So we work with about 300 women a year. About 52% of our women, it's very specific, isn't it? About 52%. 52% of our women are British nationals. The remaining are from pretty much everywhere else that you could imagine. A large portion of our women are here under the radar. I would say illegally, but I prefer the phrase under the radar. And a significant number of our women are either currently experiencing or have previously been trafficked into or around the UK. I was debating about how to talk about this today, and I think we know that it is a very difficult time. The B word, as the new B word, Brexit, is just causing more and more drama, causing more and more focus to be withdrawn from real and living needs of individuals, vulnerable people across the UK, not just women, but particularly women. And I think what I want to talk about really is a couple of things that, and just picking up on a few things you said, that, the women we support do lack resources, but what I see is that while they lack resources, they are incredibly resourceful, and they are survivors, and they have fought to get where they are and be where they are. Most of the women we support began to be drawn into prostitution before they were 14. Most of the women we support came through misnamed, in my opinion, care system, came through the care system. They were failed as children, and now we're failing them as adults, continuing to fail them. It's so, we see this, and I know that you people, you guys around the room, you women, sorry, and men, oh gosh, there's men here, sorry, not used to men being around. You will have seen this, up until the day they turn 18, they're victims. The minute they turn 18, they are seen as something less than. I think, you talked also, and I was very young in the 80s, so I don't really remember it, but you talked about the fact that while it was difficult, there was still this hope. And I think the biggest challenge that we have as an organisation, and what we try absolutely our hardest to do, is to really hold the hope for our women. And if that's all we can do, to keep hoping that through the work we do, through our outreach services that meets women on the streets every week, through our daily services that provide for basic needs, through our advocacy services, through our exiting services, through our employment support work, through our specialist ISVAs working with women involved in prostitution, if all we can do is, alongside that, hold hope for the women and help them to hold the hope, I think that is our hardest and most difficult task. And I think my team would agree with that holding the hope is becoming harder day by day. I think the other challenge, particularly alongside the ones that you've already mentioned, for us specifically working in and around prostitution, is the sort of confusing legal picture across the UK in relation to prostitution legislation. And, we are working really hard to begin with other organisations in the room alongside others to really begin to challenge that, to continue challenging that, I should say, but to perhaps try and begin to take the next step. We have more and more countries that are working towards that abolitionist model or beginning to implement abolitionist legislation, and it has its flaws, usually in implementation, not actually in the frameworks. But we have to move towards a framework that supports women to exit and allows them that choice. And we are working in this really complex environment, even across London, where the enforcement policies are very, very different. We work on the border of a couple of boroughs. We are still in a position where we say to women, if you are going to be on the streets and to try and to be on the streets, do it on that side of the road, because you won't be targeted in the same way by the enforcement as if you do it on this side of the road. So, these are ongoing challenges, and it pains me that we have to say to women, if you're going to do it there because you'll be safer. We shouldn't be having that conversation at all. We should be having conversations with young men, with adult men, and saying, stop. Just stop perpetrating this violence, this ongoing violence against women. I think I'm going to stop there for now.
Thank you very much, Cara.
Great. Yes, it's set up there. Excellent. So Tom is going to, I think, flick the switch.
I'll earn my keep with the
for us. Okay, so I thought I would begin. My name's Helena Croft. I'm from Streetlight UK, and I thought I'd begin by just giving you a little bit of an overview of who we are, of the national context of the issue, and then coming to some of the challenges, headlines that I've put down, just to perhaps tease some questions along with the brilliant synopsis from the other two panellists, which have already articulated some of those challenges that we face as support services. So Streetlight UK is a specialist provider of support for women involved in prostitution, and we work with women predominantly on the issue of prostitution and exploitation, but of course that includes those who have been sex trafficked or trafficked into sexual exploitation. Are you okay? Is that working? Great. Streetlight, we believe that prostitution is not a legitimate form of work, so we would align with the importance of the language that we use, and I'll come to the why of that a little bit later, but we see it as a form of violence against women at its core, and I think until that is recognised and legislated for, we are going to continue to be challenged. So we work to ensure that women's choices, and I use that word carefully because that word is controversial in terms of prostitution, but that women are at the centre of driving our support service. So they are the ones saying this is what the support that we need, that they are pushing that forward. And really to help them rediscover, or maybe discover for the first time, their own value and worth, which, maybe some of the women that we all work with were that little girl Sarah that we heard with Brandon. Maybe they were Sarah. They were that young girl, and life has led them to the point where they have needed a support service like ours. So the national context, there's just a few stats up there that I've put up there. I don't want to go through all of them, but just to say, 180 women involved in prostitution have been murdered since 1990. And that statistic alone, along with the Mayor's recent report a few years ago, saying that the mortality rate among women involved in prostitution is 12 times higher than the national average. I mean, this speaks of the dangers, it speaks of the challenge, which I know in the room we're all aware of. And then I just wanted to give a quote from one of our amazing survivors, women that we worked with, who said this to us: the jump from having a series of one-night stands to becoming an escort was not a big one in my mind, but it was an attractive way to pay off my debts. I thought I was in control, but the opposite was true. And we're seeing increasing numbers of university students turning to prostitution. Why? Because we live in this sexualized society through many of the things that we've heard today, which have given a mirage, a facade, a false picture of what the realities are for getting involved in sex work. I use that word in quotes. So our outreach teams last year saw a 38% increase just in one particular town, and that's based around Gatwick. We work across Sussex, Surrey, London, and really, across borders in the southeast, because the nature of this trade is that the women are forced to go across borders. They are travelling large different distances now because of the growth with the online industry. Another quote for you: these are the kind of things that women have told us. I've been left with significant trauma issues since leaving the escort agency. And we work with a lot of women who are on the other side of prostitution, who are now facing and having to deal with the traumas that they, kind of buried and hid just to survive at the time. And a common thing, there is no support for someone like me. We hear common anecdotal words like that, where there is this loss of hope that Caro was talking about, where the women just do not think that support services are out there for them. So what we do, we have volunteer teams that operate across Sussex, Surrey and London. As I said, we work, and I've put some of these things up here of what we do to show that really partnership working, it's core to how we operate, and I think it's core to the future in terms of us working together to address the issue. So we work with the police, we work with local authorities, we work with rehabilitation, with National Crime Agency, immigration, and of course other charities. But I really wanted to highlight the importance of partnership working to address the challenges that the women face, but also that we face as support services in addressing the needs. We're also, in the last 18 months, we've got engaged in a perpetrator course. And it's really picking up on your point, Caro, as you said, we need to address what's going on with the men, which is the root cause of prostitution, is men's demand for sex. If it hasn't been said, let's just say it. That's what it is. That's what all the research and all the reports show. And Streetlight is primarily and predominantly, and will always be focused on the women, but we felt like we wanted to do something that addressed this root cause. So we've been engaged in this perpetrator course, which is educating men. Let's put it that way. It's a tough course that we've developed in partnership with Tower Hamlets Police and local authority. And we have seen 80 men go through that since 2017, and 2 have reoffended. Now, there's different reasons why men will choose not to reoffend, and I have to say most of them are selfish. But for us, the goal is that they don't reoffend, that they do not go out and buy sex on the street. And this is for men buying sex on the street. It's not for those, it's not addressing the issue of off-street prostitution, which is what we're engaged in across Sussex and Surrey. So lastly, I've put a slide up with some challenges that we face. And I think a big one is working together, actually. Finding solutions to support each other in terms of all the different agencies and organisations represented in this room. There's a lot of competition out there for funding because of the austerity and the lack of funding, and that creates tensions among organisations. I think another challenge is the language and the labels, which are still there. They're in the media. They're in organisations, and it's why we think very carefully about our choice of words in everything that we do. And the media's attitude and society's attitudes. And lastly, I just put, we tolerate the issue rather than tackle its root cause. And we as a society, it says something about us when we tolerate something rather than tackling it. So that abolitionist movement, I think, is growing, and we, for one, are very glad to be a part of it.
Thank you, all 3 of you, for such a really worthwhile insight. We're going to open it up to Q&A now. I ask that, obviously, you could talk forever about the topic and the issues, but if you could just keep your question to ideally something that is a one-time answer and doesn't necessarily require a back and forth from you to the panelists, just so everybody can get a chance to ask what they want. But yeah, it's over to you guys. Sammy.
So you also do a lot of work with women in institutions. Do you work with any women from the lap dancing industry, and who your work is has the lap dancing clubs to be an issue?
I can make a comment on that. I think I was really glad in your talk, Sammy, that you highlighted that, because it's been something that I'm aware, particularly in London, that there is a gap in that. Now, we, of course, come across some of the women that we work with. They have not just been involved in off-street prostitution. They've been escorts, they've been in brothels, they've been in lap dancing clubs, they've been in strip clubs. But what we hear is that they're falling through the net because of the legislation and the reasons that you've offered. So I think it's an area where we definitely need to see a release of resources and funding to plug those gaps and to identify where women are falling through the net.
I think our focus, we've been in existence for 12 years. Our focus up till recently has very much been women involved in street-based prostitution, but more recently we've started extending that work. In terms of kind of the broader sex trade, if you like, for us, we are similarly beginning to think about some of those things, but we're currently engaged with one London local borough, I was nearly said authority then, borough, with their licensing team, who are looking at what they're looking at reviewing how they license those kind of premises, and we are working with them to develop a framework in which the women who are working in those situations can be better looked after, but also can have access to support through us to begin to think about exiting that before they perhaps get drawn in any further, or even if they have been drawn in further and that's part of what they do. So I'm really hopeful. It's a bit of a pilot for us, working in that way, but I think it could have a bigger impact than us just targeting specific clubs for now. So we're giving, so, you know, maybe I'll come back in a year or two and tell you how it's going.
You spoke about working and the importance of working in partnership. Do you have any advice around when you're trying to work in partnership, but different agencies have different takes on, so some are coming from an abolitionist standpoint, some are coming from a decrim standpoint, some use the term sex worker and think that's great, some don't. How do you work with that?
Okay. Thanks, everyone. I think my approach, my personal approach, is that everything we do within the context of supporting women with direct services is about the needs of the women. So if the local authority health team, who have a very harm reduction focus, not exiting focus, want to support our women with their sexual health, I'm willing to do that. So, you know, and it's most important that we do that. So I always take it right back to what are the needs of the women and how can doing this work and working with this organisation help the needs of women, that, you know, the women in front of me that come through my door. Because actually, at that point, it's not about politics, it's about what they need to progress. I think, you know, there are parts of what we do that it's very difficult to do in partnership with others, such as the campaigning work and things. So it is just about choosing where you can, you know, where you can find things that will work and where you can't. And I think, you know, we do, you know, I am very passionate about what I do, but I am also very conscious about the increasing polarisation that we have in society at the moment. You know, Ellen DeGeneres being done, you know, targeted for going to a football match with the one of the Bushes, you know, George Bush, whatever, and everyone's saying, how can you do that? And it's like, well, you know, just because we don't agree doesn't mean we can't be together. So I think we have to take it right back to the needs of the women. And on the issues where we can work together, do it. And on the issues where it's too hard, you know what? That's okay.
Sorry, somebody right behind you on the end row. Yeah.
It's a question for Pratna, actually. Given that we've got a new Home Secretary, and you were talking about one of the 4 difficulties was about women and immigration issues. Since the story broke on Windrush and other abuses of immigrants who've lived in the country for a long time, has there been any real changes to the policy that's been helpful?
No, I mean, I don't think I have any faith in the current Home Secretary. In fact, I would love to have a battle with her. I fantasise about the 2 Patels going head to head.
I'd like to see that. Next year's conference.
A friend told me her money was on me, so I'm really...
Wonderful.
She's right-wing. She once, you know, wanted to introduce capital punishment. So that tells you a lot about where she is. She's not in the business of injecting some kind of humane politics into the immigration debate anytime soon. What I can say is that we have a domestic abuse bill going through Parliament at the moment. That has produced a bit of an opportunity and a bit of a platform to try and seek support, cross-party support if possible, to bring amendments to provide support for women who are particularly marginalised or are not included. I think there are lots of flaws. It kind of is hailed as a possibility, you know, once in a lifetime opportunity. It's a landmark bill. I think there are lots of problems with it, but insofar as that's what we've got, then that becomes the site at the moment for trying to inject, you know, bring in some positive sort of measures, and that definitely includes migrant women and more protections for migrant women. We've argued that the domestic abuse bill actually excludes migrant women completely, and therefore it's not a bill for all women. And so we're arguing that we're pushing for amendments, trying to get support across the parties for amendments to ensure that there are measures that make it easier for migrant women who've been subject to violence and abuse to be able to go into a refuge, to access other emergency social housing, to access key benefits, to be able to report abuse to the police or social services without fearing that their data is going to be shared with the Home Office. That's a major issue at the moment that many women face. To be able to rent privately if they want to without fearing that landlords are going to check on their immigration status, because that's part of the surveillance culture that's been introduced and hasn't been dismantled even after Windrush. And what we found is that, there are many migrant women who can't even go into refuges as a result of abuse and violence because they can't claim housing benefits, so they can't pay rent. They don't have money to live on, and refuges don't have the resources to provide them with those funds. So they go into private B&B accommodation. We had a situation not so long ago where we put a number of women with no recourse to public funds in a particular bed and breakfast, and then found that the landlord was sexually trying to harass one of them. So we then had to move all our women out of there and find another B&B. It's an unregulated area, and it's just so full of dangers and risks. And if you're marginalized, then the risks are just, exacerbated. So we're trying at the moment to use the domestic abuse bill and the opportunity it's giving us to push for amendments to ensure that women have some kind of access to housing and benefits and so on, which helps to keep them safe. I don't know if we'll succeed. Who knows what's going to happen in this current political climate. But those are the ways in which we're trying to make a difference.
I'm sorry to draw it to a close. We have time for a couple more questions.
Hi, thank you, Dad. Another question for Pragna Patel. So I was wondering if you could expand on what you were saying about how the conservative fundamentalist religious notions going on, and how that, not notions, excuse me. I wondered if you could expand on that.
Yeah. I should keep it short because, time's moving on. It's a big discussion and debate in itself. But what we're finding is that there is a backlash that women are facing. And that backlash doesn't just come from austerity measures and right-wing authoritarian governments, but also from right-wing forces within communities. And the more that there is a vacuum in terms of access to housing, access to benefits, access to, protections, the more religion is stepping into that breach. And the chilling aspect of this is not sort of liberal strands of religion or more progressive strands of religion that are stepping into the breach in terms of providing and meeting people's daily needs, but very conservative, ultra-conservative fundamentalist forces, and they have a particularly patriarchal agenda. What their aim is to do is to reinforce patriarchy, to reinforce the stereotypes, to reinforce the kind of cultural norms that have harmed women over the years, and to take over structures and subvert those structures in order to reinforce patriarchal norms. So they're, for example, setting up alternative dispute resolution forums, religious tribunals. And if women have no access to the formal legal system, what happens is that they're driven to these forums to try and resolve their daily needs or problems that they face: divorce, contact with children, custody, and so on and so forth. And the rulings in these forums are incredibly misogynist, and anti-human rights. And they pose a particular problem for us. And yet these forces are also the very forces that the state partners with in order to, you know, whenever it needs to sort of speak to minorities. These are kind of religious leaders who are male, authoritarian, conservative, if not fundamentalist, who are patriarchal, who are not elected, who are self-styled, and yet they speak on behalf of the community, and that includes women and children, even though they have no interest in social justice or women's justice issues. This is a growing problem, and the more the state retreats from its functions and duties to protect citizens, the more these forces fill that vacuum and provide services, but in a way that pushes back against women's gains, children's rights, and so on. So it's a really chilling development.
Thank you very much. I'm going to take one more, if it can be very quick. Sorry, the lady at the back already had the microphone, but not to put you on the spot, but there may be an opportunity at lunch to discuss anything else, certainly with me, as a representative of CEAS, policy-wise. But yes, please.
Hi. About the definition of sex workers. Personally, I'm a survivor of that industry, and I feel that...
Sorry, the microphone just keeps...
It's going on and off, isn't it?
Yeah.
Is that better? Yeah. So I'm a survivor of that industry myself, and I feel that myself as a sex worker is diminishing and watering down my experience. I feel that that industry enables trafficking, and so to use the terminology sex worker isn't fitting with any kind of exit program or help that we are in need of.
Yeah, and that's the comment that I think we're all making from the platform, that we absolutely align with that. And just to come right back with all that's been said to Caro's point, that it's the women themselves that need to be at the heart of everything that takes place. We need to lift it out of politics. We need to lift it out of our own agendas. I mean, we heard even from Sammy, a charity worker that was involved. I find that massively challenging as a director of a charity, that we don't have our own agenda. This needs to be about the amazingly brave women who are survivors, and they need to be front and centre, as far as I'm concerned, in everything that we do.
Yeah, thank you so much to the three panel speakers. Sorry we got a little sidetracked. We do have a lunch break now for those needing a little break. We're going to be back here at 2 p.m. But yeah, see you soon.